She signed the papers for 45 acres of marsh and rot on a Thursday morning in July, and the land agent watched her like a man watching someone walk into a fire. The clerk behind him had stopped pretending to file documents. In the back corner of the room, Clifton Parrish stood with his hat in his hand and said nothing at all, which was its own kind of statement. Naomi Corban set the pen down and folded her copy of the deed and put it in her coat without looking at any of them. Outside, the Oklahoma Territory sky was white with heat. She walked the 3 blocks to the edge of Linden, where a borrowed wagon was waiting, and drove out to see what she had just bought. What she had bought was called Sallow Flats by everyone in Redbud County who had an opinion about it, which was everyone. 45 acres of low bottomland along Redbud Creek's western bend that had flooded twice in 5 years and never properly drained. The last owner, a wheat farmer named Dutcher, had planted it twice, lost both crops to standing water, and simply stopped paying taxes. The county had held it 3 years before listing it at auction. The bidding opened at $80. Nobody bid. The agent reduced it to $60. Still nothing. At $40, a man near the back offered $35 as a joke. His friend laughed. Naomi had raised her hand and said $40, clearly, and then raised it again and again until the number reached $275. Which was everything she had that was not committed to the first 6 months of operating expenses. She had not made this decision quickly. Naomi was 28 years old and had been a widow for 14 months. Her husband, James Corban, had died of a fever in the spring of 1892, leaving behind the dry goods route he had been building for 6 years, 2 mules, a wagon that needed the axle replaced, and enough unsettled debts that by the time she had sorted through everything, the mules and wagon were gone, and what remained was a number that was not enough to start anything sensible, but was not nothing. She spent 3 months deciding what to do with it, and she made the decision the way she made most decisions, by first understanding what the problem actually was. The problem, as she saw it, was not that she had a small amount of money. The problem was that a small amount of money in a normal market bought a small piece of something normal, which was not enough to sustain an operation. She needed land that was priced below its actual potential because something about it scared other people. Sallow Flats scared other people. She had driven out to look at it in April, 2 months before the auction, and walked the perimeter alone for most of an afternoon. Then she had gone to find Octavia Plum. Octavia was 63 years old and had been farming a piece of bottomland east of Linden since before the territory opened to settlement. Her farm was considered eccentric by most of the county, which meant that it produced reliably and consistently, and Octavia refused to explain her methods to anyone who came to look. She had a garden that stayed green through dry summers, and a drainage system built over 30 years that people called overly complicated and Octavia called functional. Naomi had arrived at her fence one April afternoon and said she wanted to understand bottomland before making a financial decision, and Octavia had looked her over and said, "You'd better come in." They talked for 3 hours. Muscovy ducks, Octavia said, matter-of-factly, the way she said everything. Not domestic ducks, not the white ones people kept for show. Muscovy. The heavy, ugly ones with the red face markings and the bad temperament. They were bottomland animals. They ate cattails and duckweed and algae mats, and the standing reeds that choked waterlogged soil. They walked through standing water, and their feet broke up the surface compaction. Their manure went into the soil and fed what was underneath. Put a large flock on waterlogged ground and keep them there through a season, she said, and you'd find out what the ground actually was. Could be nothing. Could be something. "What's underneath Sallow Flats?" Naomi asked. Octavia looked at the far wall for a moment. "I walked that land 20 years ago before the flooding. The soil profile, where I could see it along the creek bank, was deep. River-laid. The flooding didn't ruin it. The flooding covered it. There's a difference." She paused. "I'll tell you something else. There's a limestone formation in the middle of that property that's been under reed mat so long nobody goes near it anymore. I don't know what's under there. But limestone formations in the bottomland of this creek system tend to mean something." "What kind of something?" Octavia shrugged, the way she shrugged when she did not want to make a promise, the kind worth finding out. The ducks arrived on a Wednesday in 2 wagons from a supplier in Chickasha who shook Naomi's hand and said with genuine concern that he hoped she knew what she was doing. 180 of them. They were exactly as ugly and opinionated as advertised. They made a sound that was less a quack than a hiss combined with a low industrial chatter. They investigated every corner of the temporary pen before the wagon had fully stopped, and the largest, female, a heavy, dark-bodied animal with a broad white patch on her wing, established her authority over the other birds within the first 40 minutes through a series of brief, definitive confrontations that required no comment. Jasper Tull appeared the morning after the ducks arrived. He was 16, the middle son of a family that farmed dry ground 2 miles north, and he had the look of someone who found things interesting that other people did not bother to think about. He leaned on her fence post and watched the ducks for a while, and then said, "I heard you got a lot of ducks." She was fixing a gate latch. "I do," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "What are they for?" She told him, briefly. He considered the ducks again with an expression of careful reevaluation. Then he said, "I'll help, if you want. I don't need pay right now. I just want to see how it works." She looked at him. "You'll work hard." "Yes, ma'am. And you'll do it the way I tell you, not the way you think it should be done, until you know enough to have an opinion worth having." He nodded, accepting this with the seriousness of someone who understood the terms were real. She put him to work that morning, and he was back before she was up the next day, and every day after that. The first 2 weeks were the particular kind of difficult that attaches to beginnings. The ducks found every gap in every fence. The largest female got into Naomi's food stores twice. A group of 12 birds discovered a drainage break at the south edge and had to be retrieved from a muddy depression a quarter-mile away. Jasper repaired the south fence and reported this with the straight-faced professionalism of someone determined not to find it funny. The water trough needed to be moved 3 times before the birds would use it consistently. But the ducks went to work on the cattails. Within the first month, a section along the south boundary had been reduced from 6-foot reed wall to knee-high stubble and exposed dark soil. The birds moved through it with the focused efficiency of animals who had found exactly the terrain they were built for. They didn't care that the work wasn't impressive. They just ate and moved and ate. Naomi walked the cleared ground every morning. She crouched down and pressed her fingers into the soil where the ducks had been, and found it darker and finer than the surface crust suggested. In the lowest areas, it was cool and slightly damp even on hot afternoons. Not waterlogged anymore, just held. She wrote to Octavia, describing what she was seeing in exact terms. Octavia wrote back in her cramped handwriting. "The smell will change before the color does. When it stops smelling like standing water and starts smelling like turned earth, you'll know the drainage is working. Don't interfere. Let the ground do what it wants." The smell changed in the 6th week. Naomi had not expected to feel as much about this as she did. She wrote it down in her notebook and kept working. The duck eggs started at May Lindell's general store in the 2nd month. It was May's suggestion. She had come out to the property on a Saturday to see what the talk was about. The talk being primarily skeptical and occasionally mocking, and she had looked at the operation with the practical attention of a woman who had been running the county's primary commerce for 20 years, and knew a gap in supply when she saw one. "How many eggs are you getting?" May asked. 40 to 60 a day right now, more as the flock settles. May looked at her steadily. "Bring me 30 a week. I'll price them below what people paid for delivered eggs, before the drought took out the supply route." The first batch sold in 4 days, the second in 3. By the 6th week, Naomi was supplying May with 60 eggs a week, and May was asking for more. It was not much money, but it was real money, which was different from the theoretical money she had been running on since the auction. Jasper, who had taken over the morning egg collection with a care that Naomi chose not to comment on directly, began arriving 15 minutes earlier each day and keeping more detailed records of which birds were producing at what rate. She noticed but said nothing. His investment in the operation had grown into something that functioned better when left alone. It was Cord Mabry at the feed store who said it to her face. He was a rancher, heavy through the shoulders, with the confidence of a man who had been right often enough that he had stopped considering the alternative, He said it loud enough for the other customers to hear. Duck eggs. That's the great plan out at Sallow Flats. She had just restocked May's shelf. She turned around. They've sold out 4 weeks running. He made a sound that wasn't a laugh and wasn't anything else. She carried her supplies to the wagon. May caught her eye across the counter and gave her a look that required no translation. Clifton Parrish came to the property in the 8th week. He rode up on a gray horse in the early morning alone, which surprised her. She had expected him to bring someone official. He was 51 years old, broad and deliberate, and he owned the largest cattle operation in Redbud County, built on the back of a dam he had constructed on the main creek 10 years ago. That dam gave him reliable water. Reliable water in the territory was power, and he had always understood that. He looked at the cleared sections, 17 acres now, with pale green threading up through the exposed soil, and he looked at the ducks working through the remaining reed wall, and he said, "You've made a start." "Some of it," Naomi said. She did not put down the fence tool she was holding. He told her he wanted to make an offer. He named a number. It acknowledged the work she had done, without fully accounting for what the work was producing. He was a man who had made many such calculations, and usually found them accurate. "Why?" she said. He paused. "It's good land, properly managed." "It was good land before I got here," she said. "You could have bid at auction." He studied her for a moment with the focused attention of a man recalibrating. "There are questions around the creek boundary," he said. "Water rights along the western bend are not fully documented. Questions like that take time to work through." She understood exactly what he meant. She had understood it before he arrived. She picked up her fence tool. "I'm not selling," she said. He put his hat on. "Think about it." She wrote to a lawyer in Enid that afternoon. His name was Stiles. She described the situation in precise terms and asked what she needed to know about creek boundary water rights in the territory and what it cost to protect them. She mailed the letter before dark. The ducks found the spring in the 10th week. More precisely, the largest female found it, and the rest of the flock followed. Jasper came to find Naomi in the barn on a Tuesday morning and said, with the flat calm of someone working hard to stay even, "You need to come see what she's doing." The large female was at the limestone formation in the middle of the property. The low hump of rock, still half buried under the last of the reed mat, the ducks had been working around. She was pressing her beak into a gap at the base of the largest stone, methodically, with the focused intention of an animal who has located something and intends to reach it. Around her, a cluster of 20 birds had arranged themselves in a loose half-circle, pressing close and pulling back, pressing close again. Naomi watched for a moment. Then she walked up and put her hand on the stone where it met the ground and felt it, cold air moving upward through a gap. The temperature difference was several degrees, unmistakable on a hot morning. She looked at Jasper. "Get the pry bar from the barn." It took most of the morning. The limestone slab was 4 feet across and had been set deliberately. The edges were too regular for natural settlement, and the stone beneath it was fitted work, dry stacked limestone in a rough circle that went down. They worked around it in increments, stopping twice when the angle needed adjusting, while the large female stood as close as she could manage and watched, with the imperious concentration of an animal who believes she found this first. When the slab finally shifted and tipped, the smell came up before anything else. Cold and mineral and entirely unlike the air above it, the specific cold exhale of underground water moving in the dark. The opening was roughly 2 feet across, lined with fitted stones that descended into a darkness that smelled like winter. Naomi lay flat on the ground and pushed her arm into the opening and felt cold air rising steadily, and then after a moment, the sound she had not quite let herself expect. Water, moving water, somewhere below. She sat up and looked at Jasper. His face was doing the thing faces do when something important has happened, and the person is not sure yet what to do with it. "Is that?" he started. "Yes." "A spring?" "Yes." He sat back on his heels and looked at the opening, and then at her. "How deep?" "I don't know yet. We need a rope and a lantern." She paused. "And we need to not tell anyone yet." He looked at her sharply. "Why not?" "Because I don't know what I have yet, and because once people know, everything changes, and I'm not ready for everything to change until I know what I'm changing it to. Jasper was a practical 16-year-old, and the practicality of it reached him. He nodded once. Then, almost despite himself, he said, "She figured it out before any of us." She did. He almost smiled. She can have the first drink. Despite everything, Naomi laughed. It came out louder than she intended, and the large female, who had pressed her beak into the opening again, startled and backed up 3 feet with an expression of profound offense. Naomi replaced the slab as best she could and walked back down to find Octavia. Octavia came out the next morning. She descended a rope into the opening with a lantern and the calm of someone who has learned to hold her reactions until the data is in. She was down there for 15 minutes. When she came up, her hands were wet to the wrist, and her expression was the expression of a woman processing something important before she speaks about it. "It's an artesian spring," she said, sitting at the edge of the opening and wringing her sleeve. "Cold, clean, constant flow. It's rising, not standing, it's fed from below. Depth to the water surface is approximately 35 feet. Below that I couldn't measure, but there's volume." She paused. Someone capped this deliberately. The stonework is old, older than the territory settlement. Why would anyone cap a spring? Octavia looked at the fitted stones. Could be a property dispute. Could be someone who planned to come back and didn't. She stood. The why doesn't matter right now. What matters is that you document it, file it, and establish your legal position before anyone else does. She looked at Naomi steadily. Parrish came to you. He did. He doesn't know about this yet. I don't think so. Then he's moving on guesswork. He sees the land producing and wants it before he fully understands why. Octavia picked up her lantern. If he finds out about this water before you have your documentation filed, he will come at it hard. He has a county official he works with, and enough resources to slow and obstruct for a long time. You might win eventually, but eventually is expensive. I know. Then move fast. She moved fast. Stiles had already written back from Enid with a letter that was careful and specific. An underground spring on private land was classified under territory law as belonging to the land title, provided the title was uncontested and the source was documented before any competing claim was filed. The phrase "before any competing claim was filed" was the one she read 3 times. She paid for a survey the following week, pulling money she had set aside for a second feed storage structure. The surveyor spent 2 days on the property. When he finished, the Western Creek boundary, the one Parrish had implied was uncertain, was documented and confirmed as belonging to her parcel by 14 feet. She filed the survey with the county land office the same afternoon. She filed the spring documentation the following Monday, with Stiles's formal letter attached. She did all of this without announcing what she was doing or why. The drought came in the 3rd week of August, the way serious droughts come. Not gradually, but like something that had been waiting on the other side of a door and simply walked through. Redbud Creek dropped to less than half its normal flow within 10 days. The water Parrish controlled through his dam became critical. Wells that had been reliable started pulling slow. The county water depot raised its prices twice in 2 weeks. Naomi's property was different in a way that became visible from the road. The cleared sections stayed green when everything around them went straw-colored and brittle. The ducks were healthy. The egg supply to May's store held steady. May sold every dozen the day they arrived. Cord Mabry stopped at Naomi's fence on a morning in September. He stood with his hat in both hands and his face doing the specific work of a man managing pride while feeling need. "Your land looks different from mine," he said. "It's the grass cover," Naomi said carefully. "Holds moisture better than bare ground." He looked at the green low section. "That's more than grass cover." She didn't answer. He turned his hat in his hands once. "I've got 40 head," he said. "Water's not keeping up. I don't want to sell at drought prices if I can help it." "Give me a few days," she said. He nodded and left. She stood at the fence and thought about what Octavia had said about moving carefully, and what Stiles had written about competing claims, and what Parrish had implied about county processes, and what was sitting 35 feet below the limestone ridge on the highest point of her property. Stiles's next letter arrived that week. He had done some careful asking around. What he found was specific enough to be useful. Parrish had approached the county assessor about an emergency water resource declaration, a process that could theoretically bring an undisclosed water source under county management during a declared drought. The critical word in his letter was theoretically. The process required the source to be undisclosed. Hers was on record. She went to May on a Friday morning and laid out everything plainly. May listened without interrupting. When Naomi finished, May said, "You're using community presence as protection." "Yes." "And if Parrish shows up with papers?" "He can show up with whatever he likes. The spring is filed and dated. Whatever he files after that date runs into prior claim." She paused. "What I need is for enough people to be there that whatever he does in response, he does it in front of witnesses." May was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded once. "I'll send word," she said. "Sunday morning, 9 o'clock. I'll be there myself." She paused. "And I'll bring the account book in case anyone wants to talk terms on the spot." Naomi had not asked for that. She felt something shift in her chest that was not quite sentimentality, but was somewhere near it. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," May said. "Just make sure the water's as good as you say it is." "It's better," Naomi said. Sunday morning arrived without any weather to signal its significance. Clear sky, already warm at 8, a dry wind from the south. By 8:30, people were already coming up the road. She had thought maybe 20 people, families most directly affected, a few curious townspeople. By 9 o'clock, there were close to 40 gathered at the base of the ridge, and more still coming. Cord was there. Jasper's family had come in force, his father and both older brothers. Families she recognized from May's store and the feed supply. Octavia had driven out from her property and was standing near the back with her arms folded, watching with the quiet attention of someone who has been part of something since the beginning and wants to see how it ends. Naomi stood near the spring structure she and Jasper and his brothers had built over 3 days. A timber frame, a hand-turned windlass, a cedar bucket, and she looked at the gathered people and felt the particular sensation of having prepared for something and finding it larger than the preparation. She was not a natural speaker. She had written notes. She did not look at them. "Thank you for coming," she said, loud enough to carry to the back. "Most of you know what this is. There's a spring on this property that I've documented and registered with the county. The water is clean and constant. I'm opening it today, and I want to tell you the terms." She laid out 3. Those who could pay did, at a rate she and May had worked out the previous week, below what the county depot was charging. Those who could work but not pay negotiated labor credit. Those who genuinely could not do either got water without cost. Cord spoke from the middle of the gathering. "What's the rate?" She told him. He did the math in his head, and she could see it reach him. Someone toward the back said, "That's less than what Briggs charges at the depot." "Yes," Naomi said. There was murmuring, and it had a different sound than skepticism. Clifton Parrish walked through the gate, with the county assessor beside him. He had brought 2 other men she did not recognize. The crowd shifted slightly to let them through, not from deference, but from the spatial adjustment that happens when something significant enters a space. He walked to the front and stopped and looked at Naomi, then at the spring structure, then at the 40 people between them. She watched him understand that he had arrived late. Not just late by minutes, but late in the way that mattered more. 40 people who needed water had just been offered it on fair terms by someone who had spent 10 months earning the right to do so. The politics of the moment were beyond what his assessor could reach. Because the people standing in this space were not abstractions to be addressed through legal filings. They were his neighbors, and they were watching him. The assessor started to step forward, and Parrish put a hand on his arm. The assessor stopped. Parrish looked at Naomi for a long moment. "The source will need to meet county water safety standards," he said. His voice was even. Whatever he was feeling, he was not showing it in front of 40 people. "I'll welcome any inspection," she said. "Full access, testing of whatever the county requires." She paused. "The water doesn't stop in the meantime." He held her gaze. The crowd was very quiet. Then he nodded once, said something low to the assessor, and walked back out through the gate. His men followed. The assessor went last, not quite quickly enough to avoid the expressions of people who watched him go. The crowd exhaled, not a cheer, then that, and more real. People moved toward the spring, toward May with her account book, toward each other in the small conversations of people working out practical details. Cord found Naomi at the edge of the gathering and stood beside her a moment. "For what it's worth," he said, "I was wrong about what you were doing out here." "You weren't wrong," she said. "You just hadn't seen enough of it yet." He nodded slowly, deciding whether that was better or worse than a simple correction. Then he went to talk to May about the barrel rate. Jasper appeared at her side. His arms were tired from running the windlass all morning, and he was trying not to look as satisfied as he was. "She got to the front of the line twice," he said. "That sounds right," Naomi said. He went back to the windlass. The county inspection came 9 days later. 2 men with equipment and clipboards spent 3 hours at the site. The report came back 2 weeks after that. The water met all applicable standards. No restrictions were recommended. The assessor signed it. Whatever Parrish had said to him in private, he was not willing to falsify a public health document over it. Naomi acknowledged to herself honestly that she had not fully expected that from him. Parrish's second visit came in November. He came alone, and he knocked at the gate. That was different. She went to the gate and looked at him across the fence. He looked at the property, the spring structure, the 40 cleared acres, the green low sections, the ducks moving through the last of the northwest reed wall, with the expression of a man who has been thinking about something for a long time and has arrived somewhere he did not expect to be. "My legal expenses this summer were significant," he said. It was an unusual way to begin a conversation, and she understood it as an unusual kind of admission. "Probably mine were too," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I want to ask you something directly." She waited. "When you set the water terms in August," he said, "you could have charged what the drought market would bear. You priced it below the county depot instead. Why?" She looked at him. It was a genuine question. He actually wanted to understand it. "Because I intend to be here in 20 years, she said. "And you don't build 20 years in a place by treating people badly when they need something from you." She paused. "And because it was the right thing to do, and I generally try to do that when I can figure out what it is." He absorbed this. "I've operated differently," he said. "I know." She looked at him steadily. "It's worked for you up to a point." He held her gaze and something moved in his face. Not defeat exactly, but the adjustment a man makes when he has to recalculate not just his strategy, but his understanding of a situation. "I'm not going to pursue any further action regarding the spring or the water program," he said. "I want you to know that directly, not through lawyers." She studied his face. He meant it, not from generosity, but from the honest calculation of a man who has looked at his position clearly and found that continuing costs more than it returns. That was its own kind of honesty. And she found it human rather than satisfying, which required a different response than she might have expected from herself. "I appreciate you telling me that," she said. He looked at the ridge. "I still have 60 head running," he said. "The creek won't last the winter at this level. I'd like to purchase water access at your posted rate." He paused. "The same rate as everyone else." She opened the gate. "Come look at the operation," she said. "Then we can talk about volume and schedule." He came through without the air of someone granting a favor. She walked him around the property, the barn, the cleared acres, the recovering soil, the spring structure. At the spring he looked down into the shaft for a long time and said, "How much does it produce?" "Enough for every operation in the county," she said. "That's Octavia's estimate. I trust her estimates." He straightened up. "You've been supplying 45 operations since August. 47 through October." He nodded slowly. "And you never ran short?" "Not once." He looked at the cleared land, the green low sections, the property that had been called Sallow Flats for 15 years, and that now had a different quality entirely. Not transformed into something it had never been, but revealed as something it had always been underneath the flooding, underneath the mat. Underneath the 11 years, nobody had stayed long enough to find out. "I misjudged the land," he said. "You misjudged what the land needed," she said. "I was just the person who knew what that was." He looked at her, and for a moment something in his face was more unguarded than she had seen it. He was 51 years old and had spent 3 decades being the most powerful man in Redbud County. Whatever it felt like to stand on someone else's property in a drought year and ask to buy water at the standard posted rate, she did not find satisfaction in it. She found it human. "Go see May," she said. "She keeps the accounts. Bring your herd count and delivery schedule and she'll set it up." He nodded, then walked back to his horse and rode out. She stood at the fence and watched him go. Jasper appeared behind her. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is he going to buy water at standard rate?" "He is." Another moment of quiet. Then Jasper said, "How do you feel about that?" She thought about it honestly. "Like it's the right outcome," she said. "Not a victory, just the right outcome." "Is there a difference?" "A victory means someone lost. This is just everyone getting what they need." She turned back toward the barn. "Come on. May's coming Thursday to go over the accounts, and I want the production numbers ready." The rain came in late November. 3 days of genuine soaking rain that filled the creek and brought the county depot prices back down. Operations that had been drawing heavily from the spring reduced their frequency. She had planned for this. The spring income decreased. The egg income held. May had added a second restaurant account in the county seat, and the numbers were strong enough now that Naomi had begun looking for a second hand to help Jasper with the morning rotation. She walked the full 45 acres on a Sunday in December, the first time she had done it end to end without stopping to work on something. 38 of the 45 were cleared and recovering. The soil in the lowest sections had come up thick with native grass, real grass, the kind that builds over time. The remaining 7 acres were still reed wall, still being worked. She stood on the ridge beside the spring structure in the early light and looked at all of it. The valley beyond her fence line was beginning to show what the rain had done, faint green at the road edges, the creek audible from here on quiet mornings. Linden was visible in the distance. She thought about the morning she had signed the deed in that land office, with the agent watching her like a man watching someone walk into a fire. Jasper came up the ridge behind her. He had been arriving earlier and earlier as the season turned, and she had been paying him a real wage since September, a number she was not ashamed of. The conversation about his long-term role in the operation was one she was looking forward to having when the time was right. He stood beside her and looked at the valley for a while. "You ever think about what everyone said at the auction?" he asked. "Sometimes," she said. "What do you think about?" She considered the question. "I think about how everyone in that room knew exactly what the land was worth," she said, "and they were right by every measure they were using. The measures were just wrong." Jasper was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you do? Try to use different measures?" "I try to understand what something actually is before I decide what it's worth," she said. "There's not much point in pricing something you don't understand." He looked at the northwest corner, where the last of the flock was working through the morning, steady and indifferent to the cold, the way they worked through everything. "She figured out the spring before any of us," he said. "She did." He almost smiled. "She can have permanent front-of-line access." Naomi shook her head and turned back toward the barn. There was still work. The accounts needed reviewing, the northwest corner would need checking by afternoon, and she had a letter to write to Stiles about the second season documentation. She had learned things from this land and from this year that she could not have learned any other way. She had learned that most of what people call ruined is just covered, that the difference between dead ground and living ground is usually not the ground itself, but whether anyone has had the patience and the specific practical knowledge to clear what has been smothering it. She had learned that the moment you hold something people need is the moment your character is most fully on display. Not before, not after, but exactly then, when you have it and they do not. What you do in that moment is what you actually are, and the decision carries consequences that run longer than you can calculate at the time. She had learned that belonging to a place is not something you are given. It is something you build with the same care and patience you give to everything else you are serious about. It cannot be bought or legally obtained. It can only be made through the small decisions, the fair price, the open gate, the water that kept coming up cold and clear from 35 feet below. The flock was moving through the northwest corner when she came off the ridge, working through the last of the heavy reed wall with their usual focused efficiency. The large female was at the front, as always, pressing directly into the tangle without hesitation, the way she pressed into every obstacle from the first morning she arrived. She never once acted as though it might not eventually give way. It always did.